At 62, I never envisioned my life crumbling like this. A seemingly minor car accident. They called it a fleeting mishap, a twist of cruel fate, and suddenly, I was plunged into a 3-week coma. Upon awakening, everything felt distant, hazy. My physical strength was depleted, my mind clouded. However, the most devastating aspect was the profound feeling of displacement, of waking into a reality that no longer felt mine. My son, Daniel, committed an unforgivable act, leaving me destitute and without a home. Have you ever experienced such profound betrayal? Please like and comment below, sharing your location. Don't forget to subscribe for more of my stories. Thank you. The physicians were compassionate, patiently explaining the intricacies of my recovery in soothing tones. Yet, an undercurrent of unease lingered in their voices, a subtle implication that I was being handed back a life I barely recognized. They informed me of my weeks-long unconsciousness, but no one had adequately prepared me for the crushing loneliness that would engulf me upon opening my eyes. Where was Daniel? My son, my world. He should have been there. I desperately needed him. Returning home, I anticipated a sense of relief. The familiar architecture of my dwelling, the comforting aroma of my kitchen, the warmth of a place I had painstakingly built, these were things I cherished. But the moment I crossed the threshold, a chilling premonition washed over me. It didn't feel like home anymore. No one awaited my arrival. No trace of Daniel, no messages, no calls. The silence was heavy, stifling. I wearily navigated the house, searching for any semblance of normalcy. And then I discovered it, lying innocently on the kitchen table. Documents, meticulously arranged as if it were just another ordinary day. But it wasn't. My hands trembled as I picked them up. My heart plummeted as I deciphered the words, conveyance of property. Initially, my mind struggled to comprehend. I repeatedly reviewed the pages, desperately hoping for a misinterpretation. But no, Daniel had sold the house, without informing me, without even seeking my consent. He no longer saw me. He didn't acknowledge the years of dedication, the sacrifices, the love I had poured into our lives. He simply didn't see me. Daniel, I desperately tried to rationalize it, hoping for an error, a correctable mistake. I traced the crisp paper with my fingers, yearning for the words to rearrange themselves, to offer a different meaning. But no, there it was, stark and undeniable. Daniel had sold the house while I lay in a coma, utterly unaware. I wasn't merely a spectator. I was a pawn in his callous game. He had relinquished the place I had called home for years, without a second thought. No warning, no discussion, nothing. A cold dread seized me. How could he do this to me? How could my son, my own blood, take something so precious from me? The memories of years of sacrifice flooded back, each late night spent working to provide for him, to ensure his needs were met, to create a secure haven for us. And yet, none of it mattered. It wasn't enough. I paced the house, feeling utterly lost. The walls, the furnishings, the cherished photographs on the mantel, they felt distant, unreal. The crushing weight of his betrayal pressed against my chest. My heart pounded, threatening to suffocate me. But I refused to cry. Not now. Not for him. He had already taken enough. My hands trembled. As I navigated my contacts list on my phone, Daniel's name dominated the screen. I stared at it, the weight of unanswered calls and messages pressing down on me. How could I have been so naive, so trusting? I dialed his number, the ringing in my ears a mocking countdown. Each ring echoed in the empty house, taunting me. Finally, he answered, his voice nonchalant, as if everything were perfectly normal. Mom, hi, how's it going? Are you home now? Yes, I'm home, I responded, striving to maintain composure. I'm looking at the paperwork for the house sale. Daniel, what in the world is this? I could detect his hesitation on the other end, but I wouldn't grant him an opportunity for excuses. I trusted you. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? By selling my home without even telling me? His response was weak, defensive. It wasn't like that, Mom. I didn't think it was a big deal. I thought maybe. No, I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. No, don't even try to justify this. You sold everything we had. You sold my life, Daniel. And I didn't even know. How could you possibly think this wasn't a significant event? A long pause followed. I could hear his breathing, but there was no apology, no attempt at reconciliation. It was in that silence that a profound shift occurred within me. I had spent my life giving, sacrificing, expecting nothing in return. But this time, I wouldn't remain silent. This time, I wouldn't allow him to dictate my choices. I'm repurchasing the house, I declared, my voice steady, yet the finality of my words resonated deeply within me. And then, you're leaving, you'll pack your belongings and depart. I don't want you here. Power. The power to make my own decisions, to cease being a victim in my own life. I wouldn't let him escape accountability. I ended the call without waiting for a reply. My hands still shook, but the panic had subsided. A spark ignited within me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in ages. I remained seated for a considerable time after disconnecting, gazing at my phone, the silence of the house pressing down on me. For years, I had been the giver, pouring my time, my finances, my affection into others, until I felt utterly depleted, until I could barely recall the last time I had prioritized myself. And in that moment, I realized I didn't have to continue giving. I surveyed the house again, and this time, the despair didn't overwhelm me. I had allowed it to consume me, to drag me into a place where I felt responsible, where I felt compelled to apologize for being taken for granted. But now, the tables had turned. It was his turn to face the consequences. The house remained unchanged. The walls, the furniture, the photographs, they were all still mine. But the atmosphere had shifted. A heavy, quiet anticipation hung in the air, the calm before the storm. I drew a deep breath and retrieved my phone, scrolling through my contacts. I didn't hesitate. I knew precisely what to do. I contacted the attorney first. My hand quivered slightly as I dialed, but my voice was resolute when I spoke. I need to buy back my house, I stated, before he could even greet me. I require your assistance with the necessary documentation. The sale was invalid. I was incapacitated. I'm repurchasing it, and I need expeditious action. This wasn't solely about the house. It was about something far greater. It was about making a statement, reclaiming what rightfully belonged to me, reclaiming my dignity, my space, my life. I wasn't merely reclaiming bricks and mortar. I was reclaiming myself, following the call with my lawyer. I contacted the bank. The necessary funds were readily available. I had saved, I had worked, and now it was time to utilize my resources. I wasn't seeking permission. I wasn't seeking approval. I could hear the distant sounds of traffic, the hum of life continuing without me. People were living their lives, oblivious to the storm brewing, but I was ready. I had always been ready. I simply hadn't realized it until now. I rose from the kitchen table and walked through the house, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors. It felt different. The house was no longer just a home. It was a battlefield, and I was determined to win. I didn't know how Daniel would react. I didn't care. The damage had been done, and now it was his turn to feel the consequences. I wouldn't remain silent any longer. I wouldn't allow him to erase me. Not this time. The paperwork, the legal documents, everything was finalized. It was official. The house was once again in my name, and nothing Daniel or anyone else could do would change that. Yet, despite this, a sense of apprehension lingered. I couldn't predict Daniel's reaction. Our last conversation had been strained. His voice, flat and defensive. Would he offer apologies, or would he erupt in anger upon discovering the truth? I was uncertain, but I knew this wasn't merely about the house anymore. It was about him. It was about the years I had dedicated to raising him, the sacrifices I had made, and the callous disregard he had shown me when I was no longer useful. He hadn't just taken the house. He had taken me for granted. He had discarded me, assuming I would always be there to meet his needs. I had given him everything, but it was never enough. I dialed Daniel's number, my hands steady now. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. This was my moment. Daniel, I stated when he answered, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. I've repurchased the house. You're no longer residing here. A lengthy silence followed. I could hear his breathing, shallow and rapid. I didn't give him a chance to speak. I wouldn't give him an inch. You sold the house while I was unconscious. You exploited my vulnerability to do as you pleased. But this is my home, and I'm reclaiming it. You're leaving. Pack your belongings and find alternative accommodations. I'm finished being your fallback plan. His voice broke the silence, now frantic, pleading. Mom, you don't understand. No, I interrupted. You don't get to explain. You made your choices. Now, I'm making mine. The call ended abruptly, and I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart pounding. I was unsure what to expect next. I didn't know if he would arrive, enraged and ready for a confrontation, or if he would retreat and lick his wounds in private. But at that moment, I no longer worried about him. I wasn't concerned about his opinion of me, or whether he would accept my decision. I was free. The house was mine again. And so was I. The house felt different, even though nothing had physically changed. The walls, the furniture, the framed photos, everything remained as it had been when I left. But the atmosphere had shifted. A palpable tension filled the air, a quiet hum of anticipation. For the initial days, I didn't hear from Daniel, not a word. I anticipated his arrival, at least some form of resistance, but he didn't appear. The silence was almost more oppressive than anything I had imagined. I wondered if he was plotting some form of retaliation, some angry confrontation, but nothing transpired. It was as if he had vanished entirely from my life, leaving only the empty house and the echoes of his absence. I found myself wandering through the rooms more frequently than usual, almost as if attempting to sense his presence. But it wasn't the house that had changed. It was me. I was no longer the mother who sacrificed everything, who silently bore the weight of the world for her son. I was someone new, someone who had finally prioritized herself. The decision to banish him had been more difficult than I had let on, but the more I contemplated it, the more it felt like the only possible course of action. That evening, as I sat on the sofa, enjoying a glass of wine, a knock came at the door. I sprang to my feet, my heart leaping into my throat. But it wasn't Daniel who stood there. It was a delivery person. "I have a package for you," he announced, handing me a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. There was no return address, no note, just a package. I accepted it, bewildered, and closed the door. My hands trembled as I resumed my seat on the sofa. Slowly, I unwrapped it, my curiosity piqued. Inside was a letter from Daniel. My breath hitched as I read his words. "Mom, I understand your anger, and I comprehend why. I was wrong. I believed I was acting in your best interest. I thought you'd be better off without the house. But I now realize I was mistaken. I'm truly sorry. Please, don't completely shut me out. I've left my belongings outside. If you're still willing to speak, I'll be waiting." The letter was brief, yet its impact was more profound than I anticipated. I remained seated for a long time, staring at the paper, wrestling with my decision. Was he genuinely remorseful? Or was this merely another attempt to manipulate me into forgiving him, to reclaim me on his terms? I was unsure. Perhaps I was still angry, but perhaps, just perhaps, I was also heartbroken. Daniel was my son, and no matter how deeply he had wounded me, he still held significance in my life. I rose and approached the window. His belongings were indeed outside, neatly stacked by the curb, his old suitcases and boxes sitting silently in the driveway like a desperate plea. My heart ached for him, but I wouldn't let him back in so easily. Not yet. Not until I was certain he understood the consequences of his actions. The letter remained on the kitchen counter for days. I didn't touch it. Each time I passed it, a surge of mixed emotions, anger, hurt, confusion, even guilt, washed over me. I had spent countless years pretending everything was fine, suppressing my own needs and desires to ensure Daniel had everything he required. And now, it seemed, it was too late to return to the past. But the longer I left the letter unopened, the more I felt I was prolonging the inevitable, as if I was waiting for something that wouldn't come. The silence was suffocating, a constant reminder of the chasm between us, of the distance I had created between myself and the son I had raised. It wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't even about the betrayal. It was about everything I had lost, everything I had willingly given. I finally picked up the letter one evening as the sun began to set. The orange glow from the window cast a warm light on the room, yet all I felt was cold. The chill of years of sacrifice that had never been enough. The coldness of realizing that, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't be everything to him and still remain myself. I reread the letter. His words hadn't changed. The apology was present, yet it felt hollow. It wasn't about comprehending the damage he had caused. It was about him wanting me back, needing me to accept him, to forgive him, so everything could revert to the status quo. But nothing would ever be the same. I wasn't the same. As the days passed, the weight of this decision became more profound than I had ever imagined. The house, the money, the possessions, these were replaceable. But what I had lost was my sense of self. I had spent so many years striving to be the perfect mother, the perfect provider, the perfect glue that held everyone together. And in doing so, I had lost myself. I had allowed my worth to be defined by what I could give to others, but no more. The following morning, I did something unexpected. I carefully folded the letter and discarded it. The box of Daniel's belongings remained, but I felt no urge to open it. I felt no compulsion to forgive him, to alleviate my own guilt or regret. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I had been invisible for so long, hidden behind the mask of mother, caretaker, provider. But I had decided, in that instant, that I wouldn't remain invisible. I wouldn't bend and break to ensure everyone else's happiness. I wouldn't be the background of anyone's life anymore. I would be in control. I would reclaim my life, piece by piece, until it was mine again. And it began with this decision. Peace. The house, which had once felt like a battleground, now felt like my sanctuary once more. It wasn't the house that had changed. It was me. I moved through the rooms with a sense of ownership, no longer haunted by the silence of my son's absence. It was a peculiar kind of freedom, difficult to articulate, but I was beginning to acclimate to it. I began prioritizing myself, engaging in activities I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I took leisurely walks in the neighborhood, enjoyed solo coffee outings, and purchased new clothes that were not merely practical, but made me feel like myself again. I prepared meals I actually craved, instead of the ones I had always made to please others. It wasn't about filling the void Daniel had left. It was about addressing the void within myself that had existed for far too long. Then, one afternoon, as I was completing work on a new garden I had started in the backyard, a knock came at the door. My heart quickened, but this time, it wasn't the panic or anxiety I would have felt previously. This time, it was curiosity. I opened the door to find my neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She was in her late 70s, always cheerful, with a kind smile and a ready laugh. I had spoken to her occasionally over the years, but we weren't particularly close. She had resided next door for as long as I could remember. She held something in her hand, an envelope. Her expression was serious. "I found this in my mailbox," she explained softly. "It's addressed to you. It must have been misdirected." My heart constricted. The envelope was thick, with no return address. I felt its weight in my hands as I received it. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice trembling slightly. She nodded briefly, before returning to her home. I closed the door and stood in the entryway, staring at the envelope. I hadn't anticipated this, not after everything. What could it be? I cautiously opened the envelope, my hands still trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, but this wasn't just any letter. It was a legal document, a notice from the bank. Daniel had acted behind my back again, this time in a more calculated manner. There was a lien on the house, not from a creditor or the government, but from Daniel himself. It was clear now. This was his final maneuver, his last-ditch attempt to retain control. He had placed a lien on the house without my knowledge, using the money I had provided him, the very funds I had used to repurchase the house, to claim ownership. I stared at the letter, my mind reeling. I had believed it was over. I had thought I had finished the battle, but clearly, Daniel wasn't finished with me. The rage ignited within me, but I didn't let it consume me. I remained calm. This wasn't the first time I had been forced to take control of my life. It wasn't the first time someone had attempted to undermine me. But I was finished being taken for granted. I was finished playing his games. I grabbed my phone, the trembling in my hands gone. I was no longer afraid of what came next. The call to my lawyer was brief and direct. I didn't offer explanations. I didn't need to. I knew precisely what needed to be done. A lien wasn't merely a threat. It was a challenge. And I wouldn't lose again. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter before me, the weight of the paper suddenly less significant than the power that now surged within me. This was my life, my house, my choice. This was the final straw. It was time to fight back. The following days felt charged with tension. I could feel it in my very bones. Daniel wouldn't simply accept defeat. And honestly, I didn't expect him to. I had waited too long for this moment to finally have the upper hand. But the truth was, I wasn't certain how far he would go. I didn't want to make any rash decisions, but I had been pushed too far. I couldn't remain in the background any longer, watching life pass me by. It was time for a confrontation. That morning, I didn't wait for him to contact me. I didn't wait for him to knock on my door. I left the house with a clear purpose, determined to resolve this once and for all. The house was mine again, but it seemed Daniel was not finished. He had revealed his hand with the lien, but what was his next move? I drove to his residence, my pulse quickening. His car was in the driveway, but I knew he was inside, likely plotting his next move. It had been days since I had last seen him, and I was unsure what kind of reception I would receive, but I knew what I had to do. I needed him to understand that I wouldn't be easily manipulated anymore. I knocked on the door, the sound of my knuckles against the wood feeling strangely definitive. Daniel answered, his face tight, his eyes wary. He didn't invite me in, didn't offer a seat. His posture was defensive, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "What's going on? Why did you involve lawyers?" "You did this," I replied, my voice unwavering. "You placed a lien on my house. You tried to take everything from me, and I'm done. I'm done letting you manipulate me, letting you take advantage of me. I fought for that house, for us, and you chose to destroy it all. I won't allow that to happen again." His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might speak, defend himself, beg for forgiveness, or even attempt to justify his actions. But he simply stood there, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't think you'd be okay with me simply taking the house. So I thought maybe this was the only way. The only way. The only way," I repeated, incredulous. "You thought selling our home and placing me in debt was the only way. Daniel, this wasn't about doing the right thing for me. This was about you getting what you wanted, regardless of the cost to me." He didn't respond, and for a brief moment, I wondered if he would remain silent forever. But then I saw it, the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the subtle acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, he had gone too far. I entered his house, ignoring his protests, and made my way to the living room. It wasn't about the physical space anymore. It wasn't about the house, the property, or the liens. This was about me standing firm, reclaiming my place in my own life. "Daniel," I said, turning to face him, "I'm not seeking your forgiveness. I'm reclaiming my life, and I'm not leaving until you understand that." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since I had entered, I saw him soften. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to handle it all. The house, everything. I thought maybe if I just took control, I could fix things. I didn't realize I was destroying everything in the process." There was a long silence. He was finally speaking the truth, and I could see the strain in his voice, the uncertainty that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long, but it didn't change anything. Words were just words. It was the actions that mattered now. I looked at him, no longer angry, but weary. "You can't fix something by tearing it apart, Daniel. You wanted control, and you thought I wouldn't fight back. But I will. I fought for this family my entire life, and I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for." "I don't want to lose you, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't want to lose everything." I nodded slowly, but inwardly, I knew there was no going back. "You can't lose what you never appreciated in the first place," I said, turning to leave. "But you can start fresh, and you will. But it won't be with me bearing the burden anymore. I'm done with that." I left his house, leaving behind the son who had once been my entire world. The walk to my car felt different, lighter, even, although I could still feel the weight of everything between us. But this wasn't the end. This was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one where I wouldn't apologize anymore, one where I was choosing myself for the first time in years. The days following the confrontation felt strange. Daniel didn't call. He didn't appear at my door. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for him to make the next move. Instead, I felt like I had already made mine, and it was final. It was the quiet that affected me. The silence between us was louder than any words he could have spoken. It was like an invisible wall had been erected, not just between us, but within me, and I didn't know if it would ever come down. I expected him to reach out. I anticipated a message, a call, anything. But days turned into a week, and nothing came. My phone remained silent. No knock at the door, not even a text. At first, I thought this was merely part of the process. He needed time to process what had happened. But as the days stretched on, I began to wonder if he had truly given up on me, on us. I spent my days continuing to rediscover who I was, without the constant pressure of being the one who held everything together. I did things for myself, something I hadn't permitted myself to do in years. I began taking long morning walks, gardening in the afternoons, and even enrolled in a yoga class. Small things, but enough to remind me that I was alive, that I was still here. But despite these small victories, I couldn't escape the fact that Daniel's absence had created a void within me. It wasn't just about the house, or the money, it was about the years of raising him, of giving him everything I had, and feeling like it had never been sufficient. That feeling hadn't vanished. It lingered, like a phantom at the edge of my thoughts. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea before me. I hadn't heard from Daniel for almost a week, and I realized then that I hadn't reached out to him either. The thought of calling him felt wrong. I had said everything I needed to say. I had stood up for myself, and for once, it had felt like a victory. But the victory was bittersweet. The weight of the years we had shared, of everything I had given him, of the life I had poured into him, felt like it was slipping away. It wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't about the betrayal. It was about the life I had built for myself, and the family I had envisioned. A family that had never been what I had imagined. As I sat there in the quiet of my home, I felt something within me stir. Perhaps it was grief. Perhaps it was the hurt of seeing my son walk away without a fight. But it wasn't just pain anymore. There was something else, something that felt like freedom. I was no longer waiting for him to return. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for him to confess his mistakes. I was done with waiting. The phone rang, and I froze. It was Daniel's number. I answered without hesitation. "Mom," his voice was low, hesitant. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry." I drew a deep breath, holding the phone to my ear. This was it. This was the moment I had been anticipating. But instead of feeling relief, all I felt was exhaustion. I had already made my decision. I didn't need him to apologize anymore. I didn't need him to rectify the situation. "I know you're sorry, Daniel," I said quietly, "but I've already made peace with everything. I can't return to who I was. I've made my choice, and I'm moving forward. I need you to understand that." There was a lengthy pause on the other end, and then a quiet sigh. "I understand, Mom. I really do. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I replied, feeling the weight of finality in my own words. "Just do better. For yourself. For your own life." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't feel the need to continue to try and repair something that had broken long ago. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't filled with regret or anger. It was a kind of peace, one that I had fought for, and now, finally, it was mine. The days turned into weeks, and as I walked through the house, I began to feel the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. The echoes of Daniel's absence no longer stung. They had faded into the background, and in their place, I found something else, something that felt like freedom. The house had become a symbol of my journey, not just a place I had fought for, but a representation of my own strength, my own resilience. I had spent so many years, nurturing, giving, and sacrificing. But now, I was the one who needed care. I was the one who needed to rebuild. One morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, I realized that this wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about me finding myself again. For so long, I had lived for others, lost in the role of mother, provider, caretaker. But now, I was living for myself. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I wasn't waiting for Daniel to return and make things right. I had stopped seeking closure, because I realized that the only closure I needed was the one I could give myself. I wasn't waiting for anyone to fix me, or to make me feel whole again. I was already whole. I had stopped pretending that everything was okay, that I was okay with the way things had been. I stopped suppressing my hurt, and allowing it to fester. And the change wasn't merely external. It was deep within me. I was learning to be okay with who I was, without the need to justify myself, without the need to sacrifice everything to maintain peace. I had taken my life back, and in doing that, I had finally found peace. Weeks later, I received a letter from Daniel. He hadn't called, hadn't appeared at my door, but he had written to me. The letter was short, simple. "I'm sorry, Mom. I miss you." I didn't respond immediately. I no longer felt the urgency. I knew I had done everything I could, and now, the ball was in his court. If he wanted to rebuild our relationship, he would have to meet me halfway. But I wasn't going to force it. Instead, I placed the letter in a drawer, alongside the others, the ones from the past, the ones filled with excuses, apologies, and regrets. They no longer held a place in my life. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. Connection. Real, unfiltered, genuine connection. Not based on obligation or expectation, but on love, respect, and mutual understanding. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The years of living in the shadows, of playing the role of the invisible mother, were over. I wasn't just the backdrop to someone else's life anymore. I was the main character in my own story, and that was enough.